Thank you. It's really great to be here. I always love coming to Northern Europe because it's one of the most rational thinking places on the planet. You don't seem to find that where I come from these days. I tend to be very ironic and somewhat sarcastic in my presentations, but I realize that I've had a lot of trouble translating it to a lot of the Germanic languages, so I will do my best to try to keep it as straight up as possible tonight. The topic of my talk tonight is consciousness and revolution, and this is one version of a talk that I've given all over the world in various different formats, and I shift the talk around to address each particular audience that I'm in front of. And given that we're here at the Open Mind Conference, it seemed like a really great opportunity to take a larger picture view of the entire issue as we're talking about it as relates to world revolution. So I'm calling this one a macrocosmology of world power, conflict, and revolution. So all revolutions begin as revolutions of consciousness. So what do we mean by that? What we mean is essentially the process always begins when one person or one group of a society or a culture or a civilization suddenly wakes up. And they either wake up through a process, a historical process of awakening. They find themselves in a historical cycle of awakening, as we'll see later. Or they happen to come across someone or something that is outside their culture that shows them that the way that they are existing within their own culture is not in their own best interest. And so these people wake up and suddenly realize that they have grievances with their government or their community or their culture at large, and they start to organize around them. And so ultimately every act of rebellion begins inside here. And it begins with us waking up and realizing who we are. I often quote this matrix analogy that Morpheus says about the batteries and about us realizing that we are slaves. You know, the reality is that you are a slave. And the metaphor that they meant in there, obviously, is that we are all slaves to a global system that we have very little consciousness about. It's a complex argument. We won't go into it tonight about exactly the nature of our slavery. That's a whole other presentation in and of itself, but it is based in the idea of debt and in the idea of citizenship and the restrictions and or privileges of citizenship, and in the idea that we are all collateral for our central banks and so on and so forth. This is a reality most people have no idea about, and so they have to very slowly be woken up, or as you remember in the Matrix, Neo woke up, realized that he was in some dungeon under the earth, that life wasn't what it was, and he completely freaked out. Popped a thrombo, as we call it. So, you know, waking up is a painful process. It takes a long time, and it happens in many stages, just like sleep happens in many stages. You know, you have alpha, beta, delta sleep. So, the history of the world is the history of revolution, said Che Guevara. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the last 1,000 years of history in Europe in time lapse. Anybody who wants to argue the concept of borders should really take a good look at how this all flows like water. figure if it took 1,000 years to happen, we can give it 5 minutes to watch it unfold. Look at all the kingdoms in the northern part of Europe. Look at all those individual kingdoms in there. There must be at least 100 of them. Ultimately, they all became Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark. You watch the empires disappear, you watch nation states arise. All really in the period of 1,000 years. Watch many revolutions of the way that society is ordered, the way that civilization is ordered, the way that rule of law, migration, all of these things are represented in what you're seeing here in this time lapse. So, like I said, you guys lived through it. I think you get the idea. We'll move on. Okay. So what does all this mean? How does this happen? Who's making all this happen? I found this guy. You may have heard of him, George Orwell. Very interesting character. He wrote this book called 1984. And you've wondered where this thing came from, what this means, as Andy Thomas talked to us about yesterday in his presentation. This is the way that they see us. Who's them? That's them. This is us. Okay, there is an us and them. I'll get to that later, too. Right. So, he called it the inner party, the outer party, the proles. This is the high, the middle, and the low. This comes from the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism, which is the book within a book inside Orwell's 1984. Throughout recorded time, and probably since the end of the Neolithic age, there have been 3 kinds of people in the world: the high, the middle, and the low. They have been subdivided in many ways, and they have borne countless different names, and their relative numbers, as well as their attitude towards one another, have varied from age to age. But the essential structure of society has never altered. Even after enormous upheavals and seemingly irrevocable changes, the same pattern has always reasserted itself, just as a gyroscope will always return to equilibrium, however far it is pushed one way or the other. The aims of these 3 groups are entirely irreconcilable. The aim of the high is to remain where they are. The aim of the middle is to change places with the high. The aim of the low, when they have an aim, for it is an abiding characteristic of the low that they are too much crushed by the drudgery to be more than intermittently conscious of anything outside of their daily lives, is to abolish all distinctions and create a society in which all men shall be equal. Thus, throughout history, a struggle which is the same in its main outlines recurs over and over again. For long periods, the high seems to be securely in power, but sooner or later, there always comes a moment where they lose either their belief in themselves or their capacity to govern efficiently, or both. Is that what we might be witnessing today? They are then overthrown by the middle, who enlist the low on their side by pretending to them that they are fighting for liberty and justice. As soon as they have reached their objective, the middle thrust the low back into their old position of servitude and themselves become the high. Presently, a new middle group splits off from one of the other groups, or from both of them, and the struggle begins all over again. Of the 3 groups, only the low are never even temporarily successful in achieving their aims. It would be an exaggeration to say that throughout history there has been no progress of any material kind. Even today, in a period of decline, the average human being is physically better off than he was a few centuries ago. But no advance in wealth, no softening of manners, no reform or revolution has ever brought human equality a millimeter nearer. From the point of view of the low, no historic change has ever meant much more than a change in the name of their masters. This is Orwell's 1984. Now, just take a minute to take that in. This is pretty much what has happened right now in the world. The British Empire and the American Empire have essentially merged. Europe and Russia have created an alternate economic bloc against the Anglo-American Empire, and then the Asian economies, which actually extend down into here, are the rising powers. And where are all of our wars fought these days? They're fought in these disputed areas, along the fringes of civilization, as Orwell put it. And this was intentional. After World War II, they said, okay, we're going to stop killing each other. If we got to go to war as an instrument of culling the population, of creating economic opportunity, of destroying and rebuilding, the act of Shiva and Kali and the whole spiritual process of society, maybe we'll just stop blowing each other up. Maybe we'll just go blow them up. Now, I'll get to that point later. But you watch the evolution of kingdoms to empires, to nation states, to supranational trade blocs. And this is pretty much what we have going on today. Okay, so what do I mean by consciousness and what do I mean by revolution? Well, let's look at the most recent one, which many of the people sitting in this room participated in. It was known as the consciousness revolution. It swept the world in the mid-60s through the early 80s. Its pinnacle was in 1968 when a global revolution broke out across the world. And that awakening was characterized by a few things: psychedelics, sexual liberation, alternative spirituality, political engagement and organizing, protest, and they got rid of many of the sacred cows of the previous society in science, religion, and government. They learned that science could take away many of our miracles and mysteries. They learned that religion was fallible. They learned that government was not telling us the truth. Drugs, the counterculture, consciousness, they all undermine faith in hierarchical religious authority and political authority. Now, the consciousness revolution was actually the fourth awakening that happened in American history. These are three other awakenings that happened. The first was the Puritan awakening, which led the Puritans, obviously, to forge forward to find their own home. Then came the evangelistic awakening of the middle part of the 19th century, when millenarianism and the idea of the apocalypse and the end of the world was coming around every other day, pretty much, and a new preacher was coming through town trying to put together a new offshoot of the Protestant or Catholic religion and run off someplace like the Mormons and start their own new thing. Then came the Third Great Awakening, more of a political awakening of consciousness, where we had anarchism coming out of the woodwork. This was during a time of deep economic depression. 1873 and 1892 depressions were rather brutal. At least a third of the population was thrown out of work during these depressions. Also war. There was, America's first imperial venture when we faked an attack in Havana Harbor by the Spanish and decided to go and take a very weak and ailing Spanish empire away from them. And so we took over the Philippines and Cuba and Puerto Rico. And then there was the Haymarket riot in Chicago, basically an anarchist police provocateur action where a bunch of cops threw a bomb into a political protest to try to demonize anarchists. And then there was the emergence of the global student missionary movement, there were agrarian protests, and of course, because of the Industrial Revolution, there was urban violence going on in the labor movement. Early feminism and the New Woman movement got rid of Victorianism and all of the button-down repression of that era. And then, of course, the early progressive movement led to things like the Wobblies and the NAACP. So what happened to the consciousness movement? Okay. How many people in this room, by show of hands, know what COINTELPRO is? 1, 2, 3 people. Okay. Good. This is a great place to start. 4 people. Yes. Is there anybody else having trouble following me? Am I speaking too fast? Okay. Okay. COINTELPRO is, and was, and is, an intelligence operation. It was based in the FBI and the CIA initially under the Nixon administration. It was an illegal program that was meant to disrupt the New Left, the anti-war movement, and the Black nationalist movement, the Black Panthers. It was an assassination program against the Black Panthers. Mark Clark and from Chicago, I'm sorry, forgetting his name. I hate it when I forget it. I'll come back to him. One of the two Panthers that were gunned down in Chicago by the Chicago police under the orders of J. Edgar Hoover. What? No, it wasn't Malcolm X. Malcolm X was actually, he was a Muslim. He was part of the Nation of Islam. The Black Panthers were at first a community group that banded together to provide both necessary social services like breakfast for kids in poor neighborhoods, but they also trained black folks to defend themselves and to defend their communities. And Fred Hampton is the name of the person that I'm thinking of. He was the 20-year-old leader of the Chicago Black Panther Party, a very charismatic leader. Him and his partner, Mark Clark, were drugged by an informant, and the Chicago police raided their apartment and shot them dead while they were sleeping. They then put forth this bogus cover story that they had gotten in a gun battle with the Black Panthers. Later on, people like Stokely Carmichael and Huey P. Newton and Tupac Shakur's mother, Assata, and Afeni, his aunt, they were all part of this COINTELPRO disruption program, which flooded their groups with drugs, which wrote fake letters that were supposedly from the leaders of each of these groups, talking bad things about the other people in the group, blaming them for being informants, blaming them for being counter-revolutionaries. They fomented dissent, they fomented anger, and they ultimately fomented a war inside the New Left. They also didn't like the fact that white and black were talking to each other and organizing together in the 60s and 70s. And so the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, they were one of the lead groups in the anti-war movement, they had bridged the gap into the Black Panther movement. This scared our government quite a bit. The idea of white and black getting together is the ultimate fear and the ultimate bugaboo to the US government. And so they infiltrated the anti-war movement as well. But it was much more difficult to do these things to middle-class white kids than it was to do to poor blacks. So they had to come up with all of these other ways to try to get at them. And one of them was the drug laws. And so the war on drugs became a way to criminalize the behavior of the protesters without addressing the politics of the protesters. So you just called them criminals and arrested them instead. And what ended up happening was that there had been a program called MK Ultra. It was a CIA program that researched essentially psychology and psychiatry, psychotropic medication. They used various substances to try to brainwash people, to create super soldiers, to create all of these different types of enhanced person, except none of it worked. It all failed miserably. And the only thing that worked was that they found out that if people took a lot of LSD, they kind of found peace. They didn't want to fight. All of the soldiers that they tested in the program said they didn't want to go to war anymore. And I said, my God, we tried to create a super soldier, and instead we've created a super pacifist. The problem was the United States Army and Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals, which was run by George Herbert Walker Bush at one point in time, they had manufactured quite a large amount of this LSD, and they had done it by stealing the patent from Albert Hoffman and Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. And they created their own stockpile of it. And right around 1968 and 69, when most of the student population around the world, Paris and Prague, Mexico City and Japan and the United States, were rising up in protest, suddenly all of this LSD started flooding into the streets of America, into white youth. Within a year, the Woodstock Nation was born. And it would take us many, many, many years to realize that so much of what we thought was our own personal revolution was actually being directed by the intelligence agencies to shape us and to change us and to take away our revolutionary potential. And then after Nixon went away, And after Watergate put him out of office and the Vietnam War ended, they had what was known as burnout syndrome. You know, they had been fighting for so long for civil rights and for ending the war in Vietnam that they finally said, enough. They wanted to check out for a while, and disco happened, and a lot of drugs in the late 70s. And this was a kind of a natural thing you see in many repressive societies once they win their revolution. You saw this in Portugal, you saw this in Spain after Franco. You saw people have fun, finally, and people wanted to have fun. But eventually, they stopped having fun, and they started thinking about things. And then this guy Reagan comes along, and he scared a lot of people. But what happened was people from the left saw a conservative revolution happening. And so they went underground. And they had a lot of help going underground because there was this new thinking coming out of the West Coast in a place called Esalen, for example, an institute of psychology, of progressive psychology on the West Coast. And they were telling them, you know, the movement needs to go within. We need to create revolutions within ourselves. We need to go and hone our spiritual being, and then once we become spiritually evolved beings, the revolution will happen naturally. And everybody bought it because it made sense. Because it's true on one level. It's very true. And we'll get into this later when we talk about the nature of a spiritual revolution. However, what that meant, though, was that there was to be a time of transformation, and then there was to be a time to come out and plug back in and bring the change that you can now bring as a stronger spiritual being. And that's what never happened. The revolution disappeared. The movement disengaged. They started to embrace things like greed is good from Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, greed is right. I'm working on myself. It's all about me. You know, I'm what's most important here. And what that created was and many books have been written about this, including the eponymously titled The Culture of Narcissism, which is essentially what society replaced the 60s with, was a culture of self-obsession. In consumerism, in psychology, in the media, it was all about the self. And then there was another phenomenon that happened. And this one, I expect to get a lot of resistance from audiences that are open-minded like this one, and particularly many of my fellow presenters, because it flies in the face of everything that they hold true and sacred, which is that we don't even have any idea where so much of what we believe is the canon of beliefs in this whole world, this progressive spiritual New Age world, we don't have any idea how much of it is actually true and how much of it is complete bullshit, dropped there specifically for intentional purposes. And part of this comes out of what was known as the crisis of postmodernism. And so postmodernism isn't even a real philosophy, it's just a made-up philosophy. It was something that they needed to follow modernism. Modernism was about science, rationality, reason. Now, science and reason essentially proved that there are no angels and devils, there's no heaven and hell, there's no miracles. We live on a cold planet at the ass end of a galaxy, way out in the middle of nowhere, and we're all that there is. And everybody went, oh my God. But on a deeply psychological and archetypal level, it was even worse because we lost hope. We became very dark. We entered the darkest period of humanity when we lost our spirit and our soul to science. And so what ended up happening in the years is that MK Ultra program, it didn't work creating soldiers, but it sure created the biggest dossier they had ever seen on psychological profiling. And they understood that people fell into two basic categories. They either archetypally, psychologically projected good, or they projected evil. They were one of the two. They saw the world as either inherently positive or inherently negative. And suddenly, two new archetypes appeared, the gray alien and the serial killer. Now, my argument is not to sit here and debate whether they exist or whether they don't exist. I'm speaking specifically of what these people knew we would latch onto. And in the loss of our gods and our miracles, what we latched onto was the very next closest thing that was empirically the exact same thing. Jesus became a gray alien. The Armageddon became 2012. The apocalypse became the great shift, the end of the world. The Pleiadians and the Andromedans were going to come down and save us instead of God, instead of the second Messiah or whatever. And the same process just chugged on because we're the same beings. We are spiritual beings. We are also rational beings. If we don't nurture one side, the other side takes over and we become sick, pathological. So in our quest for finding a spiritual belief system, many of these things came in, and many of this bad pseudoscience and pseudo-history also began to replace it by people like Madame Blavatsky, who started out of whole cloth, made up a whole bunch of rumors specifically about Atlantis. And then there was this guy, H.P. Lovecraft, that invented all of these characters about ancient civilizations. And he wrote down all their cosmologies, and then he sent them to all the other writers of the day, and he said, mention my stuff in your work. It'll be great. We'll all cross-reference each other's creations. And then eventually no one will be able to tell what's real and what's not. Now, Lovecraft was very much a hard rationalist. You know, he was a man of science. So the idea of any of this being taken seriously was an offense to him, right? And so when I say bastardized karma here and all this, what I mean is this is not to negate any of this. You know, as Brian was here earlier, he just gave a brilliant presentation which raises so many questions that need to be answered. We don't know these answers. Let's have some real rational scientific discussion about them. But we don't have that. We've got a lot of superstition, a lot of bad science, a lot of stuff that's been debunked, but nobody knows it's been debunked, and so they keep talking about it. And all of it kind of sets a pattern. Bastardized karma means not understanding what karma really means. You know, karma is not, oh, if I say something bad about you, a truck's going to fall on me. Karma is something that is an ancient spiritual concept. It's the idea that you could pay karma for 10 lifetimes that you knew nothing about. And yet it became this almost superstition. Just like if you don't knock on the wood, some evil will befall you. And so we started to, again, create these reductionist beliefs. Okay. Now, the thing is that COINTELPRO was behind the real reason why Richard Nixon was ultimately forced from office, because it was not acknowledged at the time. It was top secret. And there was also an unacknowledged CIA companion program called Operation Chaos. Now, the CIA could not operate inside America. It was against their charter. So they could never admit that they were doing this, but they were working hand in hand with the FBI in COINTELPRO to disrupt the New Left and the black nationalists. It was purportedly disbanded in 1975, but it never went anywhere. We didn't officially know about it until the 90s, when documents that were supposed to have been shredded accidentally popped up when a journalist put in a Freedom of Information Act request on a whole other issue regarding the Black Panthers, and came back with these documents that confirm the existence of COINTELPRO. Now the government admits it, but they say that it went away. It never went away. The main focus was to destroy the future revolutionary potential of both the New Left and the African American community. It started by a systematic process of dumbing down. I call it self-obsessed idiocy. It's this idea of not even knowing that you're being dumbed down. And they wanted to eliminate critical thinking and introduce this idea of emotional intelligence, of using your intuition. Now, I should say that all disinformation contains 90% truthful information and just 10% of a twist that makes it completely wrong, or the opposite meaning. So much of it is true, and it resonates, as we say. It feels right. But what they understood was that critical thinking allowed you to look at a situation and deduce an answer. But emotional intuition meant that you had an emotional reaction to it. And emotional reactions can be easily manipulated through something as simple as television. So lowering ourselves to an emotionally reactive state made us less effective as a critical thinking force, so that we are unable to then solve problems in the way that we used to be able to. And then they implemented it through the New Age religion, which has become essentially just another religion with the exact same practices as the previous religions. Exopolitics, this idea that there's this whole other political world going on, that there are aliens running our planet. And I mean, this is something that they found people latched onto. They just became obsessed with it. And they would spend their entire lives going in circles with this stuff. It was the best way to take a huge section of really intelligent, hard-motivated people and set them off on a wild goose chase for 40 years and laugh the entire way through. And then, of course, Reagan turned most of them into the yuppie capitalists, and we got the bonfire of the vanities. Greed is good. Money, 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 money. Yay, America. Now, to the African American community, it was a little bit different. They were destroyed by a coordinated flood of crack cocaine and guns into poor neighborhoods. And then later, through the 80s and 90s, you had the rap wars, East Coast, West Coast, Biggie, Tupac. Those were all fomented by the intelligence agencies. Those two men were killed by the intelligence agencies. And then you had divide and rule, where the whites and blacks were separated again because of this fear of crime, fear of crack cocaine. Blacks were divided against themselves. So now you have Bill Cosby and rich, high-profile African Americans disavowing poor black Americans, making fun of them, the way they wear their clothes, the way they talk, because they're not rich and affluent like people like Bill Cosby. They created identity politics, political correctness, positive thinking. Everybody wins. This is an educational philosophy in America. In the 90s, they decided that children shouldn't lose, that competition was bad. So they decided to create everybody wins. So people don't realize that mistakes have consequences. Because in this everybody wins philosophy, mistakes don't have consequences. And then, of course, this idea of we are all one, this idea that we must love our oppressor, that we must embrace the person that is harming us. This is something that is very deeply rooted in many people in our world because they believe in these things of nonviolence. But the thing was, the Dalai Lama has worked for the CIA since they rescued him. The Chinese were coming to assassinate the man. The CIA rescued him. They pulled him out. He has worked for them ever since. He has promoted this idea of nonviolence in a way that it was not meant by Gandhi or the people who created it. Nonviolence is creative resistance and noncompliance, but often it is violent. It's just that the violence is one way. The violence is perpetrated on the resisting population. The resisting population does not use violence back. It uses large, direct action, non-compliance instead. And the true legacy of Martin Luther King was lost. Martin Luther King was killed because he advocated a class war. He said, race is not the issue, class is the issue. We are all being exploited. It doesn't matter what our race is. This war is wrong, and this economic system is wrong, and that's what got him killed, not the civil rights. We got a 50-year repressive response to the consciousness revolution. The war on drugs was the first step of it. Ultimately, the war on terror became the next extension, because if something like anarchism or Sunni Islam can be criminalized as terrorism, then what can we believe in? And can't anything be turned into criminal activity? The criminalization of consciousness, the idea of exploring our consciousness, of living differently than the dominant system, of opting out. All of these things became criminal. And what does this really sound like? Sounds like a religious war. The prime hidden agenda remains the suppression of an alternate religious view, that consciousness is the nature and purposeness of reality, that humans freely create their realities. Because psychoactive drugs are a means of quickly and effectively initiating individuals into this view, they must be suppressed, even if it means punishment, incarceration, and death for hundreds of thousands of people, and at this point it's millions. The United States incarcerates over 3 million people. There are over 7 million people that are being monitored by the state every day. There are 65 million people that can't pass a background check and get a job. Most of this is because of the war on drugs. Why does this matter now? Well, I came across this amazing book recently. You can see it's called The Fourth Turning. It's by 2 Ivy League sociologists. And what they did was they looked at Western civilization, in particular Anglo-American history, over a 500-year period. And they found out that there is an 80-year cycle that keeps repeating throughout European American history. Every 80 years, we run into these exact same situations. Going back to the 1500s, it's broken into 4 phases: the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis. The high is the height of that civilization or society. The awakening is when the institutions and practices and beliefs of that society is being questioned. The unraveling happens when rebellion begins and factions are created and they start to take apart that society. And finally, the crisis is when it all comes to a head. We are in the crisis phase, smack dab in the middle of it. This is actually 2025, it's not 2015. And all of these phases, without end, all crises end in a major war and economic collapse. The Great War period and the Great Depression was the last one. Before that was the Civil War period. Before that was the American Revolutionary War. Before that was the French and Indian War. Before that was the War of the Roses, Cromwell, going all the way back. So, the idea of a spiritual revolution. Okay, what does this mean, and more importantly, what doesn't it mean? Well, I believe that they were correct in the sense that they said we had to become better people. And I think they were correct in the sense that that spiritual component needed to be part of any revolution that we were having today, because we had lost that part of ourselves. And we had lost that love that drives change. And it had become all about rational killing or rational decision-making. Nothing represented that more than Vietnam and the eggheads in the Pentagon calculating body counts and calculating numbers, how many bombs to drop to make a political point. It was complete insanity. But a spiritual revolution also means being prepared for great challenges. It doesn't mean that we will become impervious to pain and we will ascend and everything will be perfect. It means that we'll be able to hold up people that are collapsing all around us because they are afraid, because they don't know what's happening, because they are not conscious of their surroundings and their situation. And the job of the spiritual warrior is to be on the front lines of that change as strength for everybody else, as guiding light for everybody else. I changed this after Rosa's talk today because she was mentioning citizenship. And I was like, gosh, that's such a loaded word, and it's true. I have to change this. It originally said, what are the obligations of the global citizen? And then I thought, oh, well, citizen's not really the right word because that kind of refers to like a specific set of obligations. But maybe we are just all members of the global community. We're all humans on this earth, and what are our obligations now? You know, what do we owe this world that's changing so fast that we can barely keep up with it? Do we owe it our action? Do we owe it our commitment? You know, do we even owe it possibly our lives? We are not asking what we owe our Mother Earth or the idea of our freedom now. We're talking a lot about what's coming at our freedom and taking it away from us. But we're not talking about what we should be doing again about it. I mean, a few of us are, and I'm grateful for everybody, like William and Rosa and a few of the others that really made a point of giving us some places to stand in, of love and integrity and honor and respect. But in the end, here's the good news. And this really is good news. This is what's been going on over the last 30 years. And this is what they're really afraid of. This is a map of global protest actions since 1979. Right now it's in the early 80s. And I want you to just sit back and watch this for a moment. Now we're in the mid-80s. It's at the end of the Cold War. Now we're entering the Berlin Wall is about to fall. Now the Soviet Empire is about to fall. And the New World Order has just begun. The Iraq War just happened. Oh, what's going on here? Wait a second. Is it just me, or are there more blinking dots there than before? This is the late 90s, the WTO protest era. Now we're getting into 9/11. See a little dip in the United States. The rest of the world is protesting the Iraq War. Not much going on over here. Oh wait, America, where are you? 2006, 2007, America, oh wait, something's going on here. America, is that you? Oh, that's Obama. That's Obama. And then, of course, there's Occupy. Yeah, that's what's going on right now. So what is really going on? Why do we have all this? Agenda 21, depopulation, economic collapse, war. Well, there's this guy named William Bramley. I like to quote him, but I have to preface my comment by saying that William Bramley's thesis is that we are all the property of an alien race like slaves or like pigs. Now, I don't subscribe to that. But in his book, what he says is that we are what is known as the custodial society. And he says the custodians, and this is a great way to look at whatever you want to call them, the Illuminati, the 1%, the 10%, the banksters, the Bilderbergers, the elite, whatever you want to call them, let's call them the custodians. Because that's how they view themselves. They view their role and obligation in this world is to manage us. And we are an untractable mass of consumers that are irascible and just nothing but troublemakers. And so every once in a while, they got to launch a few wars and kill a few 100 million of us just to keep us, you know, in the right place, keep our numbers down, keep their power intact. But what happened is they created three simple things to do this. They created war, religion, and currency. And they made us believe that war was our natural state. They made us believe that we were aggressors, that war had always been the history of mankind and will always be the history of mankind. And they created religion so that they put an intermediary between you and God, between you and the divine, you and your higher power. They put someone in between to talk to you, to him for you or her for you. But people bought it. And then they said there's currency, because you need this piece of paper between you and that person to exchange your goods. And so they rule us by stepping between us and what we want. They rule us through war by stepping between us and saying, the guy behind me is trying to kill you. You better kill him first. He's right there and he's mad. But you know, if that person were to just duck down, the other guy would be like, hey, what's that guy telling you? I don't want to kill you. They stand in between us and the divine, but guess what? We are God. We are God. You are God. I am God. We are a reflection of the divine. We are a reflection of the creative energy. And our combined heart space and heart energy together is more powerful than any piece of fear in the world. And all we need to do is recognize that there is no true separation between us. We are all here. We are not necessarily all one. We are all individuals on one level. There is ego, and the ego can be a very helpful thing from time to time. We shouldn't all think that we are in a communist utopia where we are all the exact same thing, but collectively as a network of power, as a network of heart energy, we are unstoppable. And that's the truth. And so they're throwing all of this at us. They're throwing the only thing they haven't started throwing yet is the kitchen sink. And that's coming soon. And every kitchen sink in the world under Agenda 21, as Rosa explained, will be torn out and thrown at the people. So, what will it take? Well, before we get there, I just want to show you a little something. Let's just speculate for a second on what's really going on. Frank's going to love this one. This one's for you, Frank. This is a map of the United States taken a week ago. The colors represent drought areas. I would like to point out that this area right here and this area right here are two of the highest food-producing regions in the world. This is the California Central Valley, and this is the corn, soy, and wheat belt of the United States. These two areas feed a large chunk of the world. How many people, by a show of hands, thinks it's a coincidence that those two areas and two areas alone are suffering a historical level of drought? Now, if you believe in geoengineering, which I do, and you understand that this is a global problem with many powers competing against each other, suddenly makes a lot of sense that we're being fried so that our food supply disappears and our ability to continue making food disappears. And this isn't a coincidence. And, you can argue and tell me I'm crazy, and I'll admit it, I probably am. But that's not the point here. The point is that we have evidence. And so why would they do this? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, like, come on. I loved it after 9/11 when they said, they would never do that to their own people. Exactly, because we are not their own people. They're an entirely different species altogether. And I say that metaphorically, not literally. But here's a little something. This is a little chilling. The next clip I'm going to show is from a 1973 film called Executive Action. It came out, it was written by a guy named Dalton Trumbo. It's an amazing film. And it theorizes what happened behind the scenes with the Kennedy assassination. Who the people were. It doesn't name names. It puts them all in a house and has them all talking about planning the assassination. And Burt Lancaster plays the lead. It's called Executive Action. Burt Lancaster was like the coup lord of films in the 60s. He was in 6 Days in May, which was about a military coup in the United States, and then he was in this film about the Kennedy assassination. And you'll notice that the clip opens up with them approving the assassination of Kennedy on September 11th. And that's the first thing you'll see. And this was in 1973, the same day that September 11, 1973 was when the United States overthrew Allende in Chile, okay? September 11th, 1907, I believe, was the Balfour Declaration, giving Palestine to the Zionist movement, okay? So it's a date that has huge significance. And as the quote goes on, or as the clip goes on, you'll see Burt Lancaster discussing why the United States needs to kill Kennedy and go into the Vietnam War.
Discharge was granted September 11th.
Well, that was easy.
Easier than you think.
Real problem is this, James. 2 decades, there will be 7 billion human beings on this planet. Most of them brown, yellow, or black. All of them hungry. All of them determined to love. They'll swarm out of their breeding grounds into Europe and North America. Hence Vietnam. An all-out effort there will give us control of South Asia for decades to come. And with proper planning, we can reduce the population to 550 million by the end of the century. I know. I've seen the data.
We sound rather like gods reading the Doomsday Book, don't we?
Well, someone has to do it. Not only will the nations affected be better off, but the techniques developed there can be used to reduce our own excess population. Blacks, Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, poverty-prone whites, and so forth.
Poverty-prone whites. The next great problem for the United States of America. So did you guys catch that? It was a little difficult maybe to understand him. He said that they had read that 7 billion people were going to come swarming out of the third world in the next 50 years. And that if they did not go into Vietnam, that they would not be able to get a firm foothold on population control. And that they were able, if they were able to be effective in Southeast Asia, they could apply those techniques around the world and reduce the global population to 550 million people. Now, this was being talked about back in '73 because of the Club of Rome study. It had just been published, in which the world elite got together and said, the Earth can only support a population of 2 billion, and the ideal is 500 million. ... And that's what we're going to do. But they didn't put that part into the report. So, what now? Well, as I like to say, the seeds of dissent grow into the trees of revolution and become the wilderness of change. So start planting. There is an us in them, but many, if not most of them, can become us. They can be transformed. In fact, many of them want to. Many of them feel trapped in where they are. So how about we help them get over to the good side? You play your role in this revolution. It's not your job to solve it. None of you is smart enough to solve it, and neither am I. None of us is strong enough to do it on our own. But we need to learn how to work together again and lean on each other. Don't be afraid. I showed you what they're afraid of. We outnumber them 7.5 million to 1. I will bet on those odds, people. This is about all their all-seeing eye is. Just squish it right between your fingers. This is really all it is. It's just a tiny little thing. We give it so much importance, the pyramid. Just them. Most of them are so inbred they can't even think straight. Come from your heart, yes, but don't forget to use your brain. There is a place for rational thinking. There is a place for fact-checking, for research, for knowing what you're talking about. The more that we know, the more we can accomplish. The less we understand, the more vulnerable we are. The worse quality our information is, the more vulnerable we are. The more solid our information is, the stronger we are. All of these things we talked about at this conference have beyond merit. They have history, they have evidence. But there's a reason why some of these things can't be talked about. They are because the way that they will undermine the paradigm that we have, the way they will destroy everything that they hold to be sacred in their control paradigm. And we need to act like a cloud of mosquitoes attacking this big beast from a billion places, sucking it dry in each our little way. You know, we don't need to fight it head on. Occupy and all that, they had a great intention. They didn't accomplish anything, except all those people got their names and faces and voices into the NSA computer. And they normalized the sight of riot police destroying young people in the street. And they said it was okay to use all of this type of crowd dispersal technology, crowd control. So they think that they need crowd control. And what we need is benevolent crowd control. We need to be able to gently direct the crowds, to take their anger and their fear and to channel it into action. Positive action, organized action, rational action. There is nothing more terrifying than a scared mob of people. There is nothing more out of control than a riot. They want that more than anything. The minute the first one pops off, everything goes down. And so we got to not be provoked either. We got to keep our cool. When you're talking to a Sicilian, I don't have much of cool. I got a temper. But even me, I got to learn how to be cool. I got to learn how to breathe. I got to learn how to keep grounded, even as the chaos starts to unfold around us. Always speak your truth, because in the age of disinformation, speaking truth is a revolutionary act. I want to thank you all for letting me come out here and talk to you tonight, and I'd like to open this up for questions. And I didn't bring any because it's like really expensive to bring them on the airplane. But if you want to go on Amazon, it's sold all over the world. Plastic People will be out really soon too. I'm sorry I don't have more, but I can always show people clips or something if they're here. I have the film with me. So anyway, I would like to open this up for questions.
Yes.
Does anybody have any?
Any questions?
Well, thank you for a fantastic and entertaining speech and lecture. And I just have one single sort of question that comes up that has been coming up on the other lectures also. And you seem to be going for also reasoning as a kind of solution. Now, so the question is, isn't it also needed to come up with some kind of alternative as a kind of proposition to what else we can put up with?
Well, I mean, the simple answer, in my view, is yes, of course. But there is this logical fallacy that we've created, which says, don't criticize anything unless you have a solution. That's retarded. I mean, that's completely retarded. If somebody goes to the bathroom on the floor right here, you have to say, hey, don't crap on my floor. You don't have to offer him a solution of where the bathroom is. He should know where the bathroom is. So many of these problems have common sense, self-evident solutions. But by telling us that you cannot talk about it unless you have a solution means that the burden is entirely on you to solve the problem. Well, that's ridiculous. What needs to happen is the problem needs to be identified, and then everybody needs to get into the solution. Now, the other thing is Bucky Fuller, Buckminster Fuller, he's known as saying, like, don't try to change the existing system, build an alternate system. And I believe that. I don't think that the American government can be redeemed. I think it's thoroughly corrupt. I think our entire system needs to collapse on its face, and then from those ashes, a new system needs to arise, just like happened in 1946 with the first set of international agreements, and Bretton Woods, and the United Nations, and the end of the empires. This is the exact same thing that we need to do, but we need to have different institutions. We need to have different ways of creating law and order. And some of that, I think, will come about in an inorganic way. I think that using central planning to try to plan the revolution is not going to work. I think it needs to be anarchistic in nature. And I mean true anarchism. True anarchism is all about the direct relationship between any two entities, direct democracy, direct exchange, right? Direct communication. So that's what we need to start doing. And as people start to do that, they do it because they can't rely on the dominant system anymore. It doesn't work anymore. So, you know, you go down to the gas station to get your gas, but after you go 6 times and there's no gas, you're going to stop going. You're going to go look for some other kind of fuel. I think that's how it's going to happen. More out of necessity than out of any type of like organizational plan. Because the world socialist revolution fell apart, and the so-called green revolution was bullshit, and all the colored revolutions end up being intelligence revolutions and weren't legitimate. And everything that we think is organized turns out to just be the exact opposite. And I think the only true example I can point to is when the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons got together and decided to create this thing called the United States of America, which they thought would be the new Atlantis, and they meant that metaphorically. They meant that it would be a grand republic where men would be free, humans, but they meant property-owning white men, but you know, where we would be free. We would be not beholden to a monarch and not beholden to a church, but we would be sovereign in ourselves and in our land and in our private property. It was a very simple revolution that they wanted, but yet the most difficult of its time because of the all-powerful nature of the church and the monarchy. And they had to go underground and create secret societies because they would be burned at the stake if they were talking about this openly. Well, the same thing's going on, except you're not burned at the stake now. You're stuck in Guantanamo Bay, or you're stuck in this place called Communication Management Unit, which means that they manage to not let you have any communication with any human unit anywhere. And this is, you know, extrajudicial solitary confinement that exist outside the realm of any known constitutional protection. And it's the same thing. And who are they putting in there? They're putting in animal rights activists that take pictures of factory farms. They're putting in people that blow up a Range Rover in protest. They take people that set pigs free at a slaughterhouse, and they put them in these prisons where they aren't charged with anything. They can't talk to anybody. They can't see a lawyer. There are Muslims all over America that had nothing to do with anything except the fact that they were born Muslim that are sitting in prisons right now for who they are, for what they represent. Nobody knows about this. I have no idea what's happening in my country. It's gone insane. Every week, there's another police story where another out-of-control, overarmed, amped-up police group kills another group of innocent people in a botched SWAT raid, in a botched traffic pullover, in some incident where somebody decided to exert their rights back at the police, and the police said, "Oh, you're going to challenge us? Great, we'll just kill you." They killed a 95-year-old man who was confined to a walker because he didn't want to go to the hospital. They insisted he go to the hospital. He said no. So they shot him in the belly with a beanbag gun. You know, non-lethal weaponry. Killed him from internal bleeding. This type of thing happens every single week in the United States. And at some point, people have to stand up and say something and do something about it. Please.
I noticed that one of your slides up there mentioned the crisis period of 2005 to 2025.
25, yeah.
Can you elaborate on this and tell us where you have the 2025 end figure from? What's the crisis period going to hold for us, if you know something about it? And from where do you have this end year?
Well, if I had to guess, I'd say that some kind of global war is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Probably the way that the British Empire went to war to protect its interest in the British pound and all of that, will go to war to protect the dollar and the petrodollar, which is the only thing that keeps the American economy viable. Their ability to print dollars at will, and the system of control that is dominated by the United States, and particularly its military. it will come to a point where the rising powers will finally see that we are weak enough to take us on. And there's nothing that they love more than a good war. That's the best business ever. The banks get to fund both sides and charge higher interest rates, and then they get to dictate the terms of whatever gets set up afterwards. Yeah, it's win-win for them. And if they happen to just wipe out a few billion of us, well, that's win-win for them too. But I also think the economies will collapse as well, because this fiat currency, speculative Ponzi scheme economy we have can't keep going forever. It is an infinite growth paradigm. Without infinite growth, it collapses, period. We have reached the limits of what we can grow with, you know? Did you want to ask something else?
Yeah, the year 2025.
I don't have any, I'm not specifically predicting anything on any year. It's just a 20-year period. I mean, it changes, the end dates change, it's a general 20-year period. So there's no like, you know, Jesus will show up on 2025 riding a dinosaur, you know, and like, I mean, people believe this, by the way. They believe Jesus rode a dinosaur. They do. There's Christian coloring books in the United States that say, we know that Jesus lived at the same time of the dinosaurs, but did he ride a Tyrannosaurus Rex? And then you wonder why I have no faith in my country. This is real, too. I'm not making this up. I think it was Norman Mailer who said, you know, the kids of America, they can't add 2 and 2 to save their life, but they sure can screw. Yes, sir.
Well, sorry. First of all, thank you for the lecture. It was really, really informing and sparked a thought or two in my head. I have 2 questions. Mostly, I have tons of questions, but I've heard in a documentary that it's illegal now to collect rainwater in the US. Can you tell me if that's true or false?
Yeah.
That's just insane.
I mean, not everywhere, but it's illegal in a lot of places to collect rainwater. Yep.
I understand why you don't have any faith in your country then. Excuse me 2 seconds. And another thing, being a hip-hop head, I was wondering, because I've been thinking and talking to people for a long time about the Tupac and Biggie murders. What do you have the hardcore facts that COINTELPRO or CIA, FBI, whatever, killed Tupac and Biggie?
What is the evidence of it?
Yeah.
Well, the person that did the best work on it that I can cite is a journalist named Alex Constantine. And he wrote a book called The Covert War Against Rock, and he also he wrote a piece on Biggie and Tupac. And there's also a documentary out there called Biggie and Tupac. What they basically had was the testimony of inside informants, bodyguards that were working for both the New York and Los Angeles police departments, Las Vegas police. They had Nation of Islam people that were FBI informants. The FBI acknowledges that they were watching the hip-hop world, the rap world. They were watching the gang truce that Tupac was brokering. And he was in the middle of a truce between the Crips and the Bloods that was meant to end the gang violence, and he was going to then start organizing them to start changing things in their communities, to basically reorganize like his mother and father and uncles and aunts had done in the Black Panthers 20 years before. This was something that was very well known in his circles, and there's plenty of it out there about the gang truces and about how influential Tupac was. But what happens in the media, he was just portrayed as this punk, you know, a thug. But that was, he portrayed that out to get respect from his homies and also to kind of throw archetypes on their head, to throw it back in the face of the power structures. The same thing as Jim Morrison, you know, or the Beatles or John Lennon. You know, he was just being the rebel in that sense. But beneath it was a lifetime where he grew up in the radical politics of the Black Panther Party. He watched his mother, uncles, brothers, and friends destroyed by the US government. He watched his mother get turned into a crack addict. He had a very personal stake in fixing this. And he was really, really smart. And he also had millions of dollars. And when you start to put those things together, what you have is the Black John Lennon. And they killed John Lennon for the same reason. John Lennon and Jimi Hendrix, in their day, Jimi Hendrix started playing benefit concerts for the Black Panthers, raising money for them. That's why he was killed. Constantine covers this as well. As far as John Lennon, I mean, it's pretty obvious. They had tried to get rid of him for years. They tried to have him deported. He won. He was untouchable for a while, and then as soon as Reagan came in, the first thing they did was get rid of him. You know? Bye. And there's a long lineage of this, you know, because the cultural disruption is very important in maintaining control. You know, you have to take the leaders out. And that's one of these arguments for having a leaderless revolution, because they're too easy to compromise and they're too easy to kill.
For instance?
I'm sorry?
Anonymous, for instance, no leaders.
Yeah, I mean, the anonymous thing goes only so far, you know. I mean, ultimately, it's like people, there are leaders and there are followers as far as personality types. Certain people are meant to lead, certain people aren't. That's one thing. Elevating someone to the status of the leader is totally different, giving them special preferential treatment. And it's like the Australians have this thing they call groundhog syndrome, right? Or hedgehog syndrome, I think they call it. This idea of whoever pokes their head up out of the hole gets hammered. Yeah. Huh? Oh, right, prairie dog syndrome. Yeah. So they all try to like stay at this, you know, equal level. It's like nobody really tries to stand out, and therefore nobody really draws attention. And, you know, I don't know how many of you know Australians, but I spent a lot of time there. I really enjoy Australia. And they do have a really great sense of unity amongst their people, you know, and a profound sense of identity in that regard. And they get a lot done. So I think something like that really needs to happen, in the sense of we need to harness the powers of the natural leaders without jeopardizing either the movement or the leaders themselves by elevating them or otherwise identifying them to the power structure. And, you know, when Abby Hoffman started having, action figure dolls made of him, it created a lot of resentment. And the thing they don't understand is that was intentional. They took certain members of the New Left and made them stars in order to breed resentment in everybody else. And so when a group of people have sacrificed everything to try to move a movement forward, and one person gets turned into a millionaire and he gets all the credit for it, it creates a lot of animosity. So the solution to that is A, don't elevate one person, and B, get over your ego. Stop having a stake and an expectation in it, and just do it because it's the right thing to do, and because it's your obligation.
Thank you. You mentioned competition at some point, and as Rosa said earlier, nothing in excess, and as we would say here in Denmark, everything but with restraint. However, it is my belief that many of our problems spawns or arises from the fact that our economical system is set up as a competitive system. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
I totally agree with you. I think that the idea of scarcity is fostered by competition. And the true scarcity is that too few have too much, way too much. 40% of the food that goes through the United States is thrown out into the trash. 40%, people. It's a terribly inefficient system, to say the least. And so the problem is that competition is the exploitation of the natural process of failure. And so if people need to fail, they need to realize that there's consequences for their actions. They fall on their feet, they get back up, they learn a lesson. It's part of the educational process of life. But when you exploit their failure and you say, if you fail, you will die. And these people all want to succeed too. So you have to outcompete them for your very survival. That's when it's manipulated, to take a natural impulse that we have and to pervert it for a different agenda. And so that's why they say in this spiritual revolution that the new paradigm is collaboration, that we all need to help each other out. But the problem is that collaboration means that some people have to give up what they have. and give to those that don't have. That's where we run into trouble. Nobody seems to willingly want to give up anything. They have the option to every day. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, all those guys, they can go give their money away tomorrow. In fact, I know friends of mine that got like, a few $100,000 extra that they could give me, because I sure could use it. And I want to sit there every day and tell them, I know you got that money. I know you got it, and I don't. Share. You see what you get into with that? So, what will it take? I'm asking you because I don't know. What will it take? Henry Miller said, I used to believe in change, but then I realized that nothing would ever be substantive and nothing would ever change unless you change the hearts of men. And what can change the hearts of men? Who said that? Yeah. Bravo. Higher purpose. Something beyond us. This is what I try to do, I sure as hell ain't rich, and I sure as hell ain't popular in a lot of ways. I could have done a lot of other things, but something just, it's like an itch that you just can't get rid of, And you got to keep scratching it until you find the justice behind it. Some of us have a perverted need for justice. I think it stems out of childhood trauma and a sense of being exploited and all of these things. And so many of us understand this. We've all got our motivations. But in the end, it's like, life's fun. I like my friends. I like my dog. I'd like to hang out with them a little longer, I'd like to not have the world end tomorrow in a terrible cataclysm that we can prevent. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. So once we really realize that there's 7.5 million of us to one of them, we're going to really realize our power, and we will change things overnight. Mark my words, overnight, as soon as we realize that thing. Somehow we put out the message tomorrow, everyone be in the street tomorrow, and we mean everyone. Imagine 7.7 billion people in the streets. It would be unprecedented, and yet it's possible. It's never been more possible than it is today. November 5th. What's November 5th? Oh, right, that guy. V for Vendetta, what a great movie. There's a lot in that film. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend seeing V for Vendetta. It really is a blueprint for revolution in a lot of ways. Very poetic, yes. It's a beautiful film. Anyone else have any questions? It's called V for Vendetta. Yes, it's a big Hollywood epic action film. It came from a graphic novel, a comic book series. And it's all about, it's set in England in the near future after the government has pulled off a false flag attack and poisoned thousands of children with a bacteriological attack, and then blamed it on separatists or something, and locked down the society into martial law. And the V character is someone who comes out of the past of this world, this empire, and was part of a secret experiment and has come back to try to, right the balance. And he's preaching the legend of Guy Fawkes, and he wears a Guy Fawkes mask, and he tells the story of the gunpowder plot and all of that as, a wonderful narrative vehicle and something very, very relevant to today. So I think it's a great film. The other, what was the other one? Children of Men is another film that's really interesting to see. Because it asks what happens if humans could no longer reproduce. And then it follows the end of the world as we have stopped reproducing and what happens to people. It's pretty amazing. It's an interesting view of the future. Yes, sir. Yeah, you with the hand, yes. No, not you, Frank. This guy right here with the hand.
Thank you. Thanks for a great lecture. I just wanted to ask you a quick question, actually. How do you approach people living in a reality show world who would rather try to ridicule you for your views on what to do and what not to do. How do you approach people like that? Because I've had major problems with people, even close to me, I mean close related to me, reacting that way.
It's a really good question. The answer is going to annoy you. It's a really annoying answer. It annoyed me. But if you love yourself, truly love yourself, you're able to look in the mirror and say, I'm okay. I'm a good person. I mean well. I don't hurt anyone. All I'm trying to do is change for the better. Then you'll realize that 90% of what people throw at you is about them. It's not about you at all. It's a projection of the fear that you trigger by changing their reality ever so slightly. And when you push that button, I mean, I think my job's easy. I wouldn't want Andy Thomas's job to, to save the life, because that guy's got to stand up and go out there in realms where people are paid to ridicule others and actually hold it down, explaining these things in a really solid, succinct, entertaining way. And you see it, he uses humor, because humor's the best way to get at it. If you can show the absurdity of something, that's it. George Carlin, exactly. Lenny Bruce, Bill Hicks. These are my heroes. They are my three stooges. Larry, Moe, and Curly, Bill, George, and Lenny. Because they spoke truth and they pointed out the absurdities, the hypocrisies and everything. So I would say, be cool with yourself and know that any attack on you is not an attack on you. And even though when they say you're crazy, well, what they're really saying is, well, how could you think that? I don't think that, and I'm not crazy, so if you think that, then either you're crazy or... No. I'm not crazy. I love my country. I'm not crazy, I love my country. Well, where did those two come in? Yet you hear it all the time. I'm not crazy, I'm not a racist. What? And so when you hear these discontinuity, this is all projection. So I would say, don't get upset. Also, don't feel the need to tell people. That's the other thing. Let them come to you. When I say planting seeds of dissent, I basically mean that you can drop ideas into people's head and then just walk away. That idea will grow on its own. You might not get the immediate response you need to feel better about your beliefs, hey, did you see this thing about 9/11? Did you see this thing that fell down? You believe me, right? Right? Okay, good. And it's you have all this new information and you just want people to understand it and you want people to validate it, but they're not. They're not gonna. And so that's the first thing to accept, is they're not gonna validate it. And then slowly, if you kind of stay cool and just stay on message, people will start popping up. And they'll say, hey, I got you, bro. Yeah, hey, you and me. And that's all you really need, man. You just need a little bit of connection, and just a little bit of validation here and there. I mean, this is huge validation, just having everybody sit here and discuss and open mind. Hey, open mind, all right. Hold on, hello, America? America, try this out. Okay, does that answer your question? Right on. Mr. Rasmussen.
Am I allowed to ask you now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You can actually take me to task.
As a European, I think I can talk for many of us with a revolutionary mind and seeing what's going on and see the need for change. But I think a lot of Europeans is actually hoping or expecting that this change will actually come from America. I'm sure.
Okay.
What?
Well, do you have a plan B? I really hope you got a plan B.
Did you hear that, Europeans? Do we have a plan B?
You guys, get a plan B, seriously. Yeah, man. But the Earthlings where I live, you know, like when you go up in the ding, 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 ding. So I would say we definitely cannot. In fact, the United States is the problem. I'm sorry, but it is. It represents the system of domination now. It is the cause of so much of this shit going on in this world. It is a rapacious imperial power. It has killed millions of people in its tutelage as world emperor, and we're over it. I did not sign on for $62 trillion in unsecured debt that my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson is going to have to pay. I did not say that $1 trillion can go and spend every year to our military to go and kill poor people. I did not say that that was okay. But guess what? They don't care what I think, and they don't care what 300 million other Americans think. They're going to do it anyway. It doesn't even matter if we vote. If we don't vote, this policy stays. And even when we're shown the illusion still never dissipates. It still keeps moving forward. Why? Because it is our economic engine. It's the only reason that we're in existence. Sir.
Actually, to follow up on what Frank was saying, Europe saw devastation twice in the last century. So there's still a memory in the experience and in the descendants of the people of what it means to have conflict, to be taken over, to have devastation everywhere. Even the oppressors wound up getting crushed. And in many parts of the world now that's happening. People know. People in Latin America know what trauma is, economic, political, etc. And in many other parts of the world. But the danger is, having been born in the United States of America, is that it is the ignorance of the American people and the self-centered nature of what has been going on in that country, and the fact that there is a sense of privilege. That what do you predict, or do you predict, is there a possibility actually of a civil war or something within the country, because there is an abundance of guns, there is an abundance of the right to have guns, there is a growing dislike of the government. You know, the approval rating of Congress is down to like 5 or 10%. So unfortunately, I think the United States is the most dangerous country in terms of the possibility of implosion, and or just such a immediate reaction of sudden hatred going on. I'm just wondering, what are you planning on living in the United States for the next 20 years?
I'm not sure I should say that right now. And I mean that, like, let's look at what's happened. The Department of Homeland Security has recently purchased 2.6 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition. In the entire Iraq conflict, only 70 million rounds were expended. Okay? What do they need 2.6 billion rounds for? Bullet. Now this is the Department. A hollow point bullet is a bullet that will go through anything. It will go through bulletproof vests. It will go through armor. It will go through anything. It's a Teflon tipped bullet, or it's got a little hollow point so that it spreads and it creates a big hole instead of a little hole. Right? So my prevailing belief is that 9/11 was the response to Seattle. That when they saw how the world erupted over the World Trade Organization protests in 1999, And they were completely surprised that there was this level of mobilization and consciousness about the global economic situation. They had no idea that they were going to be met with that much resistance in the streets. That scared the living daylights out of them. And they realized that they needed to change things very quickly. However, just like in the 60s, you can't just say, okay, you know what, there were protesters, so we need martial law. That's not going to work in a democratic society. So you need a pretext to create martial law. And of course they needed to go over there in the Middle East, and of course they needed to go here, and everybody had their reason for wanting this, for wanting war, for wanting this, but ultimately, you look at it, it was a coordinated global crackdown. It wasn't just the United States that became a police state, it was Europe that became a police state. China is a police state. And I mean a modern one. Canada became a police state. Canada is the most restrictive immigration policy in the world. I am banned from Canada for life because I have a criminal record. I never did anything to Canadians, never committed a crime there. I haven't even been there since I was 14, but I was on a book tour, went to go do my Canada dates, and they said, "You're worse than Satan, go away. You are never welcome here again." You know. My crimes are, non-violent crimes. I never hurt anybody. They're drug crimes. I mean, I wrote all about them in this book of mine here. I'm on a book tour. Like, I'm not peddling drugs to the Canadian youth. And yet I am, on a watch list. I've been put on the no-fly list in the United States, when I was an organizer for the Green Party. Political preemptive dissent. I'm about to wrap up a lawsuit against the city of New York for what they did during the 2004 Republican convention protests. I'm actually going to get a settlement and everything. It's pretty amazing. But none of this would have existed, if they didn't have a pretext and a reason for it. And so by creating these incredibly unfair economic policies that essentially enslaved most of the world to this economic system, and it's destroying all of the resource base and changing all of our sovereignty and this and that. This was all a coordinated plan, and eventually it was going to come back to haunt them because there's 200 million guns in the United States. 200 million guns. And, some people have arsenals, Now, I don't think they'll ever call it a civil war. I don't think they'll give it, they won't dignify the resistance with calling it a civil war. And it'll be like, I just don't see it ever becoming coordinated. I see lots of pockets of resistance happening. I don't see it being able to be coordinated, and I just see anybody who resists is getting destroyed. And that's my fear. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of guns, but it's nothing compared to the military firepower and crowd control technology that they've developed over the years. And not only that, but the collateral damage that would go back on the rest of the population, because every one of us that resist, the rest of us would have to pay for it. They would find a way to make the rest of us pay for it, so we turned in even everybody. And we've seen this before. They make things so untenable for the rest that we give up anybody we can just to stop them. But I think that what will happen is that the economy will bottom out, the dollar will hyperinflate, and nobody will be able to do anything. It will be Argentina overnight, or Poland, or Russia, or Mexico, or any other place that has had a major currency crash in the last 20 years. Malaysia, Thailand, Chile. These have all happened. We watched Argentina, right after 9/11, we watched that whole country collapse. Well, guess who unpegged them from the dollar, and guess who put them on that system? We did. You know why? Because Argentina has the same soil as the United States, and we needed more GMO farming space. So we crashed Argentina and took the entire country, and now they're the third biggest producer of GMOs in the world. Did you know that? Canada, the United States, and Argentina are the GMO capitals of the world. And that was what we did to Argentina when we gave them their austerity plan. Yeah, yes, sir. I have 1 minute left. Oh, no, I have no minutes left. My time is up. Do you guys ever see In Time with the guys with their life is now?
I'm sorry, but we have to finish sometime. The good lecture.
Thank you.
And
They cannot.
say thank you. Oh, gosh, as usual. wrong with me. Then I say again, thank you so much for this fascinating lecture.